Hi, I'm Dan, this is at Midlife Crisis Motorcyclist, and in Triumph Scrambler terms, this is the big one, the 1200 XE. Now, having worked my way up through the Scrambler range from the 400 to the 900, the 1200X, I'm now here at the top of the tree with this 2024 version of the XE. Just to recap, Triumph has had a little bit of a jiggle with its big Scrambler range for the 2024 model year, dropping the previous XE and introducing the more road optimised X with its shorter suspension travel and a few other mods along the way. The intention is to perhaps put a little bit more distance between that and the XE. Still with me at the back? Anyway, I loved the X. For me, it had a really nice combination of the kind of approachability and usability of the Scrambler 900, which, if you remember, used to be called the Street Scrambler, but then with the bigger engine, the extra grunt, the proper suspension and the electronics of the 1200. Perfect blend in my book, and a significant step up from the kind of Bonneville roots of the 900. For 2024, the XE has had a few changes as well, but they're perhaps a little bit less drastic than the switch from XE to the X that I rode last time. Changes include dropping the previous Showa forks and Onin's rear suspension units for Marzocchi items, front and back. They've still got 250mm of travel, still fully adjustable, but perhaps a little bit less boutique than what was there before. It's also lost £400 from the price, which is a good thing, so it now starts at £13,295 before extras. For that extra £1,300 over Scrambler X, you do get some nice goodies, including these Brembo brakes and a slightly fancier TFT screen with a bit more functionality. There are a few other detail upgrades along the way as well. But fundamentally, as I said before, these big Triumph Scramblers, for all their kind of old-fashioned looks, with their electronics, cornering ABS, cornering traction, rider modes, decent suspension, all that kind of stuff, these are really modern adventure bikes just dressed up in retro clothes. But it's a big unit to be razzing around off-road, isn't it? Although, saying that, I have seen owners running them on knobbly tyres, covered in mud, so there are clearly people out there who use them as such. Begging the question, is this the ultimate Triumph Scrambler? Is it even the best one? Time to find out. So here we are on the Triumph Scrambler 1200 XE. And I guess the big question is, how does it differ from the X that I rode previously? Well, the most noticeable difference is just how big the XE feels, or how much bigger than the X. And that's mainly, of course, down to the extra suspension travel, 250mm over the 170mm of the X, and that inevitably raises the seat height by quite a bit, which just completely changes the character of the bike. So we're now at 870mm for the XE, which is 50mm over the 820mm of the X, and that makes a real difference in terms of your confidence and just kind of how the bike feels, especially when you're kind of manoeuvring and paddling about at low speeds. Once up to speed here on the road, it's less noticeable, but I feel a lot more intimidated on the XE just by virtue of the saddle being high off the ground. Now that might be just because of my relative lack of experience, that, you know, a big bike like this feels unwieldy to me, and as I say, intimidating. But whereas when I jumped on the X and I felt at home, happy straight away with this, I feel like I'm having to kind of swallow a bit of a brave pill, because it's a much more imposing machine, and that extra suspension really is kind of the dominant change with the XE's character. It doesn't just affect how big it feels, it also obviously changes its behaviour on the road. And while I don't have any experience of the previous setup with the adjustable showers up front and the O-lins out the back, I can get a sense of how the extra suspension changes the behaviour of the bike. So there's definitely a lot more pitching and floating into the corners, even though the damping feels relatively firm. You can feel how the weight transfer in the bike has a big influence on things like traction out corners. I've had the traction control cut in a couple of times, which is a new one on me. I don't usually ride in a way that demands that, but I think you've got to be more aware that what you do to the bike in terms of throttle and brake inputs has a lot more influence on the tyre contact pressure and the grip that you have. So, which is fine, but it's just a different way of riding and something else to learn. And again, I think it adds to that intimidation factor, because the bike behaves differently. It behaves less like a road bike, it's more like an off-road bike, which stands to reason because it is. But I'm not in my comfort zone, I will admit. And maybe it's the change in geometry, I don't know, but it feels like there's a lot more bike to kind of heave into the turns. It's a more physical bike. A bike that you need to be more decisive with. So it's not just a bike you jump on and enjoy like I did the X. It feels like something you've got to apply yourself to, and perhaps, as I say, it's more suited to a rider with more experience than me. Don't get me wrong, I am enjoying it, and everything I loved about the Scrambler X is present and correct. The engine with its 90 horsepower, I think 110 newton meters of torque, the figures don't sound much, but it is a very, very healthy engine. It's got a lot of grunt, and if you told me it had more than 90 horsepower, I would very readily believe you. It feels like plenty to be going on with. I mean, there was a fourth gear overtake and absolutely no hesitation there whatsoever. And there's a fifth gear overtake, so it's a decisively more powerful bike, certainly than the Scrambler 900. And weirdly, I think this one, maybe it's because it's got a couple of thousand miles on the clock, you know, it's been a bit more run in. The power delivery feels more aggressive on this XE than I remember from the X. But maybe that's because, as I was just saying before, the influence that that power has on the weight transfers on the bike. So I'm feeling more influence. Now, in terms of quality of that suspension, I can't speak to what the previous setup was like. If I'm a little bit disappointed anywhere, it's in that the small bump sensitivity seems a bit... There's not quite the kind of magic carpet sensation I perhaps expected, but to be fair, I am running the bike as it came from Triumph, so I've not had to fiddle around with any of the adjustments in the forks or the rear suspension unit, so maybe there is that adjustability within the bike. But from previous experience of having ridden Öhlins equipped mountain bikes and driven Öhlins equipped cars, I wonder if it's lost a bit of kind of floatiness. I'd have to have a go on one of the older ones to test the theory, but I think, yeah, that suspension travel, again, it dominates the experience of riding this bike, and it's a bigger difference over the X than I expected. I do also wonder if the damping might be a little bit harsh. I was riding the bike previously on some cobbles, and the flutter in the back wheel was enough that the traction control was cutting in quite aggressively. So again, I think the more suspension you add to a bike, the more attention you probably need to pay to the setup. So rather than criticise the bike, I'm going to say that if you're looking at an XE, get ready to, if not fiddle with the suspension yourself, then get somebody who knows what they're doing. But on a road like this, the XE is still a lot of fun, and I'll tell you one thing that I've noticed in the few days of riding it. You learn to love the potholes because you've got all that suspension. So you see a nasty compression or a pothole on the road, it's like, yeah, I'm going to just steamroller through that sucker because I can. And let's face it, in a lot of parts of the UK where pothole could not just be an inconvenience but could maybe even have you off the bike, the knowledge that you've got that kind of get out of jail free card is rather nice. So yeah, I've ridden the bike a bit now on country roads. I've done the commute on it where definitely the extra height and heft definitely had me feeling somewhat nervous. So based on the experience so far, I'm not actually sure whether I prefer this XE over the X. But I think, in fairness to it, I should probably try it off-road, shouldn't I? So let's go and do that. So there's a quick taste of the 1200 XE on the road, but given all that extra off-road suspension and all the extra capability on the bike, as I said, it only seems fair to put it through its paces in the environment it's properly built for. So here I am at the bottom of what I think is the longest uninterrupted green lane in England. Runs across the top of the North York Moors, and it should give me a chance to really put the Scrambler 1200 XE to the test. Right, okay, let's give this a go. Now, first thing I need to do before I ride up here, I think, is to select the off-road mode. So I press that button there, scroll down to off-road, select. That gives me off-road ABS and disables the traction control, because as I say, previously when I rode on some cobbles, I found that the traction control was actually intruding to the point of view I couldn't actually make any progress. So let's give this a go. Okay, off we go. So, I grew up around here and this track used to be properly gnarly, but thankfully it's now been sanitised a little bit. But at the same time, I can't help but wonder, am I a bit of an idiot for bringing what is really a kind of fancy, kind of hipster scrambler? You know, it's a bit of a fancy bike to be bringing out off-road, isn't it? So, is this a bit of a stupid thing to be doing? Well, I guess we'll find out, won't we? But certainly I've done that off-road training with Honda, and I did the Himalayan launch. It took a bit of off-roading, so fingers crossed will be okay. And certainly in terms of hardware, you'd have to hope that the Scrambler's got what it needs to deal with this kind of terrain, which, let's face it, at the moment is pretty mellow really. It's a gravel track. I'll tell you what, the suspension does feel good over those kind of big compressions. All of a sudden, that big kind of bump swallowing capability is really starting to come good. And although, I mean, this is, you know, compared with some of the enduro racing I've been watching recently, this is really just a kind of scenic pootle along a gravel track. A very scenic pootle along a gravel track. It's nice to actually feel like I'm doing something properly scramblerish. Yeah, much as if I had a Panigale or Fireblade or something like that, it would be wasted without going on a track. So I think it feels a shame not to ride an off-road bike off-road. And just look at the views. Looks like there's some rain coming in over there, but hopefully it stays off. And I've got to say, all of a sudden, the stuff that maybe I didn't like so much about the XE when I was riding it on the road, all of a sudden makes a bit more sense out here, doesn't it? And that's kind of what I like about Scramblers full stop, is that whether it's single track lanes or whatever, they do just kind of make you want to take the road less travelled. And that's what I really liked about the Scrambler X, was that whereas on a kind of sportier bike you feel the need to have to, you know, give it some beans on a faster road, and smaller narrow roads are just a bit of a pain. On a Scrambler, whether it's a 400, a 900, a 1200 or one from any of the other brands, you kind of don't mind if you just end up bimbling along a single track lane, whether it's tarmac or dirt like this. Whether you'd want to be kind of sending it on some properly extreme terrain is another matter. I mean, this is a big heavy bike, 230 kilos. You're going to have to be pretty sure of yourself to be wanting to manhandle this around, but it's good to know that it has the chops, and my god, the suspension feels amazing through those kind of wheel-sized divots like that. I mean, sure, stand up to take some of it out with your legs, but yeah, and it just gives you a different type of day out, doesn't it? You can have fun on the roads, getting here, and then if you're lucky enough to have something like this, where you can legally ride. Unfortunately, there's not that many places left these days, but if there is somewhere like this, you can take a bit of an off-road detour and have some fun. And just look at it up here, it's absolutely stunning, isn't it? Views for miles. This track goes on for about 8 or 9 miles, I think, so I think with that in mind, I'm going to crack on and enjoy the ride. So there we go, I came, I saw, I scrambled, and having the opportunity to ride the 1200 XE out here in the wilds has really kind of underlined what it's all about, really. I think all that extra capability in the bike, it kind of makes a bit more sense out here. And you know, I do wonder if scramblers are kind of a bit like Range Rovers, you know, they're bought for the look, they never really get taken off road, but as I say, people do seem to use them out here, and it's certainly got the ability to enjoy yourself when the going gets a little bit rowdier. And also, as I said, the whole scrambler thing, it's quite nice because they look good, they're fun to ride on the road, and then if opportunity presents, as it has today, you can come out and take it somewhere a little bit more adventurous. But would I have the XE over the X that I rode previously? I'm not sure. It sounds like I'm in a little bit down on the XE. I think, as I say, more that's just been that I'm a little bit intimidated by it, probably because I'm still relatively inexperienced, and it is a big bike, very, very intimidating to ride. So I think I'm a little bit more in my comfort zone on the X. You know, it has all the same power and performance, all the same character, but it's just a bit more manageable in the kind of the everyday situations, like riding on the road, commuting, things like that. You know, on the commute I felt a bit nervous about this every time I came up to some traffic lights, filtering, you know, could I get my feet down in time, that kind of thing. I just didn't have that stress on the X, so I think for me, for where I'm at now, that would be my pick of the big scramblers. But you know, if this kind of thing appeals, you're going to get out there and you're going to do some serious off-roading, then the XE is there, and it is more than just a kind of hipster plaything. It's really got the ability out here where it counts as well. So loads of fun, I've really enjoyed my day, it's been an absolute blast. I hope you've enjoyed the video as well. If you have, make sure you hit like, subscribe for more like it. Join me in the comments if you've got any questions or anything else to add to the conversation. So for now, I'll say thanks for watching, goodbye, and ride safe.